Hello and welcome to Indie Dev Live, the show where we try to give you an insight into the lives and experiences of indie game developers. Today we have Matt Hackett of Lost Decade Games, developer of such titles as Indie Game Sim and The Wizard's Lizard. Without further ado, let's begin.
So first off, a big salute to GaminGHD. Thank you for the invite to the Indie Dev Life series, and also thanks to the GaminGHD viewers. Thanks for watching these videos. So my name is Matt Hackett. I'm a programmer, game designer, and artist living in Los Angeles, California. I work for a very small game studio called Lost Decade Games, and we make HTML5 desktop games for Steam. So how did it all begin? This started in 2010. I started working at a company called Raptor with Jeff Blair, who's the other co-founder of Lost Decade Games. And we started talking about how much we both love games and wanted to work on them. And then how we also wanted to do it in JavaScript, which was weird at the time. People didn't really do that in 2010. You could almost do it in Firefox. And so the first game that we made called Onslaught Arena, it used the canvas element back when it was very young. And the game ran very slowly, but it worked. And so it was kind of cool at the time, and that was the first game we made, and that's how it all got started. Why did you want to become a developer? So I've always been a developer. When I was before I was a teenager, I was programming in QBasic. A friend of mine showed me that you could use BASIC, which came on a lot of Windows computers at the time, and there was an even better version, which was like a full IDE called QBasic, and you could make some pretty impressive games with it. And after that, just learning the basics of QBasic, I've been hooked. I've been developing ever since, whether it's websites or video games or just generalist software. I just really like making things by programming. It's a lot of fun to me. Did your friends and family encourage you to become a game developer? Not really. My dad died when I was young, and my mom has always been, supportive, just kind of like, go do it. But friends and family and stuff didn't really support too much. Like my mom helped me through college, which is kind of nice. But as far as like wanting to be a developer, especially a game developer, support's not really there. I think it's the kind of thing some people think you're kind of nuts for wanting to make games, and you kind of have to move past that if you want to do it. What was your first interaction with video games, and what was it like? So I cut my teeth on the Atari 2600. That was our first console we ever had in my house, and I was probably 6 years old at the time, and I loved it, obviously. We also were lucky to get a Nintendo Entertainment System. I think my older brother, if memory serves, he got a Nintendo for graduating junior high or something, and so it was rough because he was in charge of it. And me and the middle brother, we had to beg him to play it sometimes. But then later on, we got like a Game Boy and a Sega Genesis, and man, I was an avid gamer back then. I played everything I could get my hands on. We rented games. I would spend my allowance money. I would mow lawns to be able to afford new games. That was a great period. Who's your favorite character from video games? Mine is Samus Aran from the Metroid series. When I played the original Metroid, it's a brutal game, especially if you go back now. It's a game that was made to sell Nintendo power. It was made to be played with a strategy guide. It's a hard game. You get lost easily. You die easily. So it was a battle to beat it, and when I finally did beat it, at the end, Samus takes off her helmet, or maybe her whole suit, depending on how quickly you beat it, and it's a woman. And this was back, in the 80s, and for some reason, like people do, they just put a default of, must be a dude, must be a guy, right, in that role. And it really opened my eyes, and I thought, like, what a, powerful woman, and it was really cool, and ever since then, Samus has been my favorite video game character. What was your childhood game? If I had to pick just one, that's tough, because I played the Final Fantasy games to death, especially, they were 2 and 3 to me, but in Japan they were 4 and 6. But those Final Fantasy games I played so much. Secret of Mana, I've got lots of great memories, spending so much time in my basement. All the Castlevania games I could get my hand on, but if it was boiled down to one, it would be for the Sega Genesis called Shining Force. It was a turn-based tactics RPG, and man, my obsession with that game, it's still alive today. What's the most memorable What's the most memorable thing that you've met in a game? That's a tough one. There's lots of really memorable moments in lots of great games over the years. There's one, though, that I remember maybe the strongest because it was with friends. I'm kind of an introvert, and I don't really play games with friends that much anymore. But there was a period where I had maybe 3 or 4 friends who were really into Left 4 Dead, the original Left 4 Dead. So every Sunday we would get online on our Xboxes, Xbox 360 probably, and we would try expert mode in Left 4 Dead. And our goal was to get all 4 survivors alive and through the campaigns. That's hard. If you've played the original Left 4 Dead in expert mode, it's really hard. And to get everyone to get all the achievements took months. And when we finally did it, we got the last person to get the achievement, the last person on that truck. I forget which campaign it was, but I remember standing up and raising my arms. And man, what a great feeling! Like it's a rare thing in life, you know. I think it's one of the reasons that people like going to sporting events, you know, like a baseball game or something, because you get to yell and you get to stand up. And when you do that in normal life, people might look at you like you're a little weird. So that was a great moment. Let's see, where are we at? How was the team formed? How have you met? So Jeff Blair, I mentioned earlier, I actually met him at Yahoo, where we were both working in the mid-2000s, but it wasn't until our later time at Raptor we started working together. And then also our music composer, Joshua Morris, who was amazing and does the music for all of our games. I met him through an online, it's a website called Overclocked Remix, which has thousands of video game remixes. I really recommend checking out that site if you like video game music like I do. How are your brainstorming sessions going? So our brainstorm sessions in our early career, they started off as all over the place. We never knew where they were going to go. They didn't have a lot of focus and direction. And I think these days they're better because we now have the perspective of what can we actually build? What can we actually, create and ship? What can we get done? And so that really limits our brainstorming sessions into a nice, tighter box of these are things we can make. So recently they're a lot better. What's the cause of misunderstandings in your team? So I have a lot to say about communication. What I'm thinking, what's in my head, and what I'm saying, it's different from what you're going to comprehend, right? Because I'll think one thing, I'll say something else, you will hear an entirely different thing, and then what you might comprehend is, who knows, right? So the things that I say and what you understand, there's always going to be some loss there. It's like a very lossy thing to try to communicate ideas to other people. And just knowing that when you're trying to express your game ideas to other people is very important, because you know that there's going to be some loss. So it really helps to draw things out, to point to other games and say, that feature, I want something like that. And the more you can get people on the same page, the better. What are your favorite games and genres? Oh man, so I like all kinds of games. I like action games. I like side-scrolling platformers a lot. Recently, I'm playing a lot of Heroes of the Storm, which is a MOBA. I don't play a lot of those games. In days of old, I really liked first-person shooters like Doom and Duke Nukem and the Quake games. And then there was a period where I really loved turn-based RPGs, like I mentioned earlier, Final Fantasy and Shining Force. That's a hard question to answer. I guess I would say I'm pretty polyamorous when it comes to video games. I kind of love them all. What types of games do you create? I create an assortment of games, but they all tend to be about death. A Wizard's Lizard is probably the game that our studio, Lost Decade Games, is best known for, and the game starts off, spoiler, the game starts off with the wizard dying, and you as the lizard, you need to go save the wizard from death. And when you die in that game, the game doesn't end. You go into this ghost world. You have to fight ghosts. So we started off with the game about death, and then Soul Thief, the sequel, is again about death and souls and the afterlife and stuff. And then I also made a game called Indie Game Sim, which is kind of about doubt, which is also kind of about death, if you think about it. So I don't know. I would say I make games about death. What do you specialize in, and how did you get to do that? So my core competency is programming, especially in JavaScript, but I also do graphics and sound. I've been programming since I was a kid, as I mentioned earlier, and I really like doing game art, whether it's pixel art or digital painting. But I've only been doing that for about 5 years. I like to think I've learned a lot in that time. In school, I studied audio a bit, so these days I apply that to also make my own sound effects sometimes. What tools do you use to build your games? So we use HTML5, which is a little unusual for a gaming studio, and we also use our own proprietary game engine called Gin, which we might open source someday. Considering the fact that there are plentiful game engines, would I use one of those or make one? These days, I'd just use Unity, honestly. It's available, it's easy, everyone's using it, which means you can collaborate with friends or even get hired by another company. But I think the real answer is to use whatever works for you. So, like I mentioned, the other co-founder, Jeff, and I, we wanted to make games in JavaScript, and that didn't make a lot of sense at the time, but we kind of did it anyway. And these days, HTML5 games are everywhere. There's thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. People are still making games in QBasic. People make games in Python. Anything you want to use, if you can run it on other computers other than your own, you can use it. How much time do you work on a day on average? In the heat of developments, crunch mode, which is kind of self-imposed as indies, but it still exists, it can get up to like 16-hour days. But recently, as things cool down and projects finish, it's more like a typical 8. Where do you draw inspiration from? I draw inspiration from other games like Metroid, Final Fantasy, Castlevania, all my childhood favorites. But the problem is that's really low-hanging fruit, and everybody wants to make games like those. The people who were kids and grew up with those games are now of an age where they know how to make software and they can make their own games. And so it's a really common thing for people to want to make games that inspired them as a kid, like Zelda and Castlevania and Metroidvania type games. And it's kind of creating this ecosystem where there's a lot of samey games. So I'm really struggling. I'm trying to push myself away from wanting to make something like someone else made, and instead trying to find inspiration somewhere else. And I think the way to do that is you travel a lot. You put yourself out in areas that make you uncomfortable that you wouldn't necessarily go to. Like pick up a hobby like kickboxing or something that maybe you're not that inclined to do normally. But I think when you push yourself, you can find inspiration in unexpected places. So that's something I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get away from just being inspired by other games, and I want to find inspiration of my own out in the world. Okay. When you begin a new project, what's the first thing you work on? The story, the gameplay, or the graphics? Gameplay is king. Game design is king. Game design is more important than anything, than story, than graphics, than platform, than tech. And because the game design is so important, that means gameplay is king. It's all about the gameplay. And this can range, right? Like some developers just kind of want to make stories out of their games, and it's more like interactive narrative, which is fine. But to me, I don't think much about story. I really like graphics. I put them in too early is part of my problem. I think that games should be gray boxed more often. And what that means is you don't use graphics yet, right? Like you just work on the mechanics. You might just have red squares dancing around your screen. You might have like gray cubes, that aren't textured and don't have a lot of detail to them. That's, to me, the way to make a game. And you spend time in that period of your game where everything's gray boxed, and you don't leave it until it feels great. And no matter what you made that game look like, it would still be fun. So to me, gameplay is king. What distribution platforms do you prefer to use? Steam. That's it. Humble is also very good. I highly recommend Humble, and that's pretty much it for us. Game development in your country. Are there a lot of companies trying to make a living by creating video games? Would you suggest to someone trying to pursue a career in game development? So we're in America. Yes, there are a lot of people here making games, and it ranges from the biggest gaming companies in the world, from like EA is here, the single biggest game publisher in the world. Valve is here, up in Seattle. Lots of games here. If you want to come and work for another company, this is a great place to do it. If you want to be indie, there's actually kind of places that are more receptive to that. Canada and some places in Europe, like Scotland, have initiatives from the governments to give you grants to help you, create a business there. So I don't know if America is the best place for indies, but if you want to come work for another company, it's great. Let's see, how hard was it to get on Steam? Easy. Steam Greenlight has opened the doors, and from our experience, we did have one Steam Greenlight campaign that went miserably bad early in our career, which is fine. Part of game development is failure, and that's why you'll see, the more you study, you'll start seeing terms and patterns, right? And one of them that you see over and over again is fail faster, right? And ever since then, I think it's really easy to get on Greenlight as long as you meet these bare minimum. You've got a good trailer, your art doesn't look that bad, your music is catchy, your concept is solid. I think it's pretty easy to get on Steam. How do you approximate the budget that you need for a game before developing it? So we're based in California, and there's a couple of general rules of thumb, and some of this comes from a company called Double Fine, which is also a big game publisher up in San Francisco, and they publish indie games as well. And in California, what it boils down to is that you need about $10,000 per month per person working on a game. And that can sound a lot, and that can come down quite a bit depending on where you are, what kind of game you're working on, where you live is a big thing, because the biggest expense is rent, and in California rent is very high. But the $10,000 per month per person is a kind of good rule of thumb, because even if you're only paying that person like $5,000 per month, you still need to buy that person a computer. There's still going to be insurance. There's still going to be benefits. There's going to be lots of overhead just to have that person on board. So you need to think about how long you've got to work on your game. If you've got $30,000, $10,000 per month, that's one person for 3 months. And like I said, that might change for you, but that's a good rule of thumb. So like my last game, indie game Sim, I wanted to work on it for about 3 months. It ended up being more like 5 or 6. And so you can kind of equate the costs, and you can see what that game needs to make. As an indie dev, would you like to sell your games retail? And what do you think about digital and retail releases? Retail is moving towards a niche market. It used to be that you'd go to a store and you'd pick your favorite game right off the shelf, and you'd take it home and you'd buy it and you'd have your game. Like I still have some of my childhood favorites right here. What do we got? Kid Icarus. Oh man, I must have bought this when did this come out? Probably late 80s. I bought it with allowance money, and my allowance was like $2 a week or a month. It took me forever to buy this game. It was like $50 in the 80s. That would be like $100 these days probably. But it's a physical thing, and this is like a slice in time. People still make Nintendo cartridges, but it's usually through something like Kickstarter, and the vast majority of games are digital only these days. And so I think there's always going to be a place for someone wanting more. Someone who just wants to buy a game can spend $5 or whatever and get it. But somebody who loves the game and loves the game studio, they could spend $100 and get a cartridge, or get a printed strategy guide and that kind of a thing. But I don't think that it's going to be that mainstream anymore, especially moving into the future. Steam, iOS App Store, Google Play, games are just digital now, and this is going to be an upsell. What's your take on VR? VR is big. It's amazing. I remember when I was a teenager going to a mall in St. Louis, and they had VR, like a VR arcade, and it looked like, what's that movie? Lawnmower Man. It looked bad. It looked awful. It wasn't that immersive. You didn't really feel like you were in a VR world. The new systems are different, and it's clear that we're going that direction. In another 5 or 10 years, everybody's going to want VR in their family room, if not on their phone even, and they're probably going to be able to get it because the prices are going to go down every year. So VR is big, and I see it getting bigger. If a publisher contacts you to propose a deal for your game, would you consider it? Yeah, we've worked with publishers before, and it went okay. I think when people think about landing a publisher, they get these stars in their eyes, like, a record company signed my pop artist friend, and then your friend goes on to be the biggest, pop star in the world or whatever. There's a lot of levels of publishers. There are some small publishers. Like there are small, tiny indie game companies like ours, like Lost Decade Games. There's some small publishers, there's medium publishers, and yeah, there's huge publishers, right? Like Valve and Google and Apple and EA and companies like those. We've worked with some of the smaller ones, and I think it's good. In fact, I think it's a really scary thing to launch a game by yourself, and if you can work with a trusted publisher, and that's key, because signing with the wrong publisher can really get you into trouble, so you've got to tread carefully. But I think that having a partner, a stakeholder in your project is a good thing. If someone else gets 10, 30% of your project, that can be worth it if that person works for it, because otherwise you've got no one else on your team. You've got 100% of your results and you keep it, and that's good, but you don't have anyone else fighting for you. So you go it alone, and it doesn't always work out. What do you think about gaming conferences? Have you ever been to one? What was your experience? Yes, we've been to most of them. I've been to almost all of them just as a visitor, and then we've also demoed at most of them too. PAX, E3, GDC, Casual Connect, California Extreme, Indie Game Showcase, Good Game Club. They're all really good, and if you could afford to go, I would do it. But I would suggest, and you can find articles on Gama Sutra and stuff that'll tell you what kind of expenses to expect, but like your average trip for a person or two to demo a game at something like PAX, it's going to be like $5,000. And that's going to fluctuate. Maybe you can get a deal. Maybe you can get to be part of the indie mega booth. Maybe that's cheaper. The thing is too, like just showing up and being at a big conference, even if it is PAX, even if it is E3, doesn't guarantee you anything. It could be a complete sink, a complete money sink. It really can be. I would say there's really two reasons to go to a conference. One is the connections. So like our marketing and business person, Whippering is who we use. We met him early on in our careers at Casual Connect. And if Casual Connect had no other benefit for us, if it just cost us a bunch of money, we met him, and we've had a great relationship with him for years. The other reason I would say is to meet your fans. We went to, actually it was me, I went to a PAX East. I met multiple listeners of our podcast. I got to high-five them, hug them, shake hands. And it was so cool talking to people who had heard our story and played our games and had their own stories to tell. And each and every person I talked to, it felt like talking to an old friend. And I think that, that was probably worth the price of admission alone. But I would say for most, especially smaller indie studios, the cost of going to a conference maybe isn't there unless you've already got a following. In your opinion, what is the best way to promote your game? YouTube. How are you affected by reviews? Oh, and my wife's home, so I'll have to record part 2 at a later time. Okay, GaminGHD, round 2. Let's continue with the questions. How are you affected by reviews? So this, for us, refers specifically to Steam reviews because that's the only place really where reviews are submitted for our games. They suck to read. They do. They hurt. But sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes, the reviews just sucks. It's negative and it just says this game is awful. The developer should feel bad or something. But other times the reviews actually have nuggets of information in there. They might say the metagame is weak, or I really hated the graphics, or whatever it is. You can just extract that information, ignore the bad parts, and you come away with good feedback and you can make a better game. Has Steam Early Access helped you polish your game more than you could have done normally? We haven't had a lot of luck with Early Access, to be perfectly honest. I think you need to tread carefully on this new platform. Unless you have a long runway, regardless of how the game sells, it's probably not a good fit, honestly. Early Access is a hard sell, and you cannot depend on being able to have any revenue from that game at all. And sometimes you put the game out there, you put your foot forward, and it's not your best foot forward, right? Because the game's not done. There are examples of games like Darkest Dungeon comes to mind that really did early access right. Nuclear Throne's another example, but these are games that their runways are paved. The developers could have worked on those games for probably a year or two, maybe even without additional revenue. And our studio has not been in that strong of a position, and so we haven't been able to hit early access as hard as we'd like or in the way that we would like. I think that early access is something where you need to fan that fire on a regular basis, like every week. You need to be updating, responding to comments, reaching out to YouTubers. It's a lot of work, and I think that you need to have that runway paved before you go down that road. What do you think about crowdfunding on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or similar? I think they're great. They're also time vampires. They can take months to set up a solid Kickstarter campaign. It really can. It can be a full-time job, it can be a commitment, and it can be quite an investment of time and money. And a lot of it's the same stuff you would, the same kind of things you'd be doing making the game, you end up spending making the campaign instead, you know, making custom art, making custom music sometimes. So I think that it's a whole endeavor, and you can't just think about, you know, I'm going to make this game and, oh, I'll also do a crowdfunding campaign. It needs to be these two cannons, right? Like firing at once. Like, I've got this great game and I've got this great campaign and I've spent enough time on it. So it's quite an investment, and it's not for everybody. What was your first game released? How has it been received by the public? We had a small game called... Let me start it over. Sorry about that. What was your first game released? How has it been received by the public? Our first major game was a Wizard's Lizard. Let me one more time. What was your first game released? How has it been received by the public? Our first actual game was Onslaught Arena, but it was such a small game that we don't really count it. Our first major game was a Wizard's Lizard on Steam, and it was relatively well received. It currently sits at mixed reviews on Steam, which means it's got somewhere like I want to say a 70-ish percentage, which we would like to have been higher. But the game did relatively well financially. It paid for itself, but it did not pay for a second game. It just isolated there. It just paid for itself. So overall, though, it's a pretty decent offering for like a first Steam game, I think, from a studio like ours. Overall, we're pretty happy with it. How many games have you worked on in the past? Probably about 24-ish. A lot of them are mobile games, mobile web games, games made for Android or iOS that either I can't talk about, they were released under a different publisher or for a different studio, something along those lines. But others, they still kind of exist. Like there's a version of Onslaught on iPad somewhere out there. One of our bigger mobile games was called Lunchbug, and the website still exists, although I don't think the Android version is still out there anymore. What game are you working on right now? So I'm working on Indie Game Sim, which is done. It's launched. It's out there. It's on Steam, but I'm going to be updating it a few more times with some more content. Indie Game Sim lets you experience what it's like to be an indie game developer through a retro filter. It's very low resolution. It's got chiptunes by Joshua Morse. It's a little weird. It's like your desktop computer. It's like playing that as if you're an indie game developer. You make side-scrolling platformer games by hand by placing entities yourself. You distribute them on a store called Vault, where it makes sales, and then you use that money to buy, make better games, develop better games, publish them. You play other competing games to unlock new tools that you can use in your own games. And then the whole way there is this darkness, this evil monster that follows you and kind of mocks you. And part of the game is about defeating that darkness. How is the key reselling market? Like G2A. When we are nearing the launch of a game, we probably get hundreds of emails for requests for keys, and maybe 1% of them are legitimate. After launch, it lowers down to maybe an email or two per day, and they're all fake. And we've given away unintentionally probably hundreds of keys to these resellers, and it sucks because someone who might have bought your game, even if not at full price, maybe on a sale or in a humble bundle, or Steam sales get pretty deep discounts sometimes, right? And those sales are forever gone. We never see a penny from that. We just lost that money, and it really does feel like these people with these fraudulent email accounts where they pretend to be this big YouTuber or whatever. They suck. They're trying, they're picking on the little guy, the indie game studios that need those small amounts of sales. It's ass. I hate it. What do you think about piracy these days? It's inevitable. Something like 90% of the people who play your game are not going to pay for it. I think Greenheart Games handled it best. I would just say look up Game Dev Tycoon and what they did with piracy. So Game Dev Tycoon piracy, if you look that up, you'll see some cool stories about what they did. And they turned a negative into a positive, and it helped propel their game to be a hit game. So I think they did a good job there. Did your games win any award? We did. The game I mentioned earlier, the Onslaught Arena, won 3rd place in the Poke 1-Up Game Developer Contest. That was pretty cool to get that. What is your greatest achievement so far as a game developer? I would say the reception of A Wizard's Lizard. It has sold over 50,000 copies across Steam and Humble. It's made something like $250,000, which sounds very impressive, but I think that people at other studios will understand that it really is just a game that kind of paid for itself and not much else. But the thing I'm probably most proud of with A Wizard's Lizard is the ton of fan art and comics and just the reception. The players were really there. They really liked the game. They latched onto Raga. They loved the dynamic between the wizard and the lizard. They liked the combat. And just the other day, I was looking up Raga art on DeviantArt, and there was new stuff I had never even seen before. So there's a ton of fan art out there. It really hit the right notes to some people, especially artists. So it's very cool. I'm very proud of that. What's the game you've always wanted to make if budget wasn't an issue? This is going to sound weird to especially people who listen to our podcast, because they know that I'm really into medieval fantasy, and I'd want something with tactics or maybe elementals like fire and water and stuff. But there's been this idea brewing in the back of my mind for a long time. It's sea monsters. I picture you control a sea monster, you come up out of the ocean and you attack a city. And I really want to see this player versus player asymmetrical real-time combat where I'm controlling a sea monster, and maybe I have I'm like an octopus, I've got 8 arms. And then your opponent is controlling the military, so they've got tanks and planes and helicopters and whatever else. And I think that dynamic would be really fun in a big AAA setting with $1 million budget. I'll probably never get to make it. Maybe someday I'll get to make a very small, retro version of it. But that sounds like a lot of fun to me. What games did you enjoy playing in 2016? I'm embarrassed to say that I just played a lot of Heroes of the Storm for the most part, which is the MOBA that I'm into from Blizzard. It's really addictive. It has really great... it just keeps you playing, because every time you play you get experience points and gold, and you fulfill these daily quests, and the gameplay itself is so satisfying. The characters are so cool. It feels great to attack stuff and kill stuff. It's a really well-made game. As far as indie games go, which is more in my sphere, I gotta give props to Owlboy, because I was looking forward to it for a long time. It looks so beautiful. It plays great. I think a lot of people are really gonna like Owlboy. If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice when you were just starting out, what would that be? Man, pay attention to the business side. We were novice at some things like game design. We were pretty good developers even from the very beginning. But I would say pay attention to the business side, because even take some classes. The business side will really bite you in the ass if you're not prepared for it. Networking is critical. I would recommend to myself network every single day. reach out to somebody, try to make friends, just try to be visible, because when you're an indie game developer especially, you kind of disappear into your little world, and you don't go to a company where there's employees everywhere and coworkers and you're just networking by existing. So you have to make that effort to do it. Last but not least, I would say find more contracts and do them and hold on to them and ask for more contracts. We were lucky early in our careers to get a bunch of contracts because HTML5 game development was pretty new and not many people could do it. And so we got a lot of work that way. We had a steady flow of contracts, but we kind of let it go to work on our own first-party games, which was good for a little while, but these days we want more contracts. And the problem is that other people have picked up the slack that we left, It's no longer that uncommon for somebody to know how to make HTML5 games. And so our ability to easily find contracts disappeared. I would say for other indies, or just the advice to my earlier self, right? Latch onto those contracts and keep doing them no matter what. Okay, last but not least, we have a final message, and I had to think about what mine might be. And it kind of reiterates a point earlier, but it's dangerous to go alone. I know it's a trope, it's a Zelda quote, I know, but when you start getting into game development, especially indie development, there's this urge to disappear into your work. You want to crawl into a hole and block the world off and just code on your laptop, and you don't want to leave to eat or socialize or do anything until your game's done. I did this for a long time. Many others are doing this right now. They're closing themselves in their houses and they're locking the doors and they don't want to hear from anybody. They just want to work. And I get that. I understand with that. But don't do it. Don't do it. Don't lock yourself up. Don't work in a vacuum, because you'll come up in 3 months or 2 years or 5 years and you'll realize that there's problems now. There's issues with your game you didn't realize. You're out of money. Your friends quit talking to you. Don't do that. Get out of your house, connect with people, eat lunch with people, eat meals with people, shake people's hands, get coffee, get beer, have fun, do whatever. Get out there, go to meetups, go to GDC, go to PAX. If you don't have the means, if you're not in the right places location-wise to do that, get online. Like join a club, get on Discord, join forums, be as visible as you can. Be on Twitter, be tweeting with the game dev hashtag, find a mentor to help guide you, because other people have been where you're at and they can help you avoid the pitfalls you're inevitably going to fall in. Remember the fail faster from earlier? You have a mentor, the mentor can help you fail faster and recover more quickly. Also find a mentee, someone who can learn from what you have to offer, and this will help you solidify your own thoughts. And your mentee can be a sounding board for you as well. It's dangerous to go alone, so don't go alone. That's it. Thanks again to GaminGHD for the invites. This has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you watching. Thanks.
Thank you for watching this show. If you enjoyed it, please consider watching some of our other videos and maybe sharing them or giving a thumbs up if you feel like it. And if you really liked what you saw, please check out our Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you could help us make much better shows and get some rewards in the process.